So we have the full spoilers for chapter 35. Boruto finally makes a move on Sarada. Kawaki has more fraud allegations, which is unfortunate, and Koji has taken a nap. So we have a lot to discuss, but of course, let's start from the top. Now the first page says, Jura, the seeker of love, and Hidari, the newly born monster. How will the two interpret the death of the bug? And of course the bug being Mamushi. Jura then says, the bug died, following its instincts, yearning deeply with lust. It just completely burned itself out. On the other hand, it was extremely animalistic and short-sighted, a consequence of being an imperfect life form. It could also be said to be nothing more than an inferior way of thinking. Hidari, what do you think? Though distorted, is this too another form of love? The way he lived in that attitude of seeking prosperity as the species known as the Divine Tree People. I myself did feel something worthy of contempt, but... And then he goes on to say, oops, sorry again, did my creepiness show again? Hidari then says, well, you are creepy. Jura then replied, give me a break, don't go disappearing on me. Hidari, you are creepy, but strangely enough, I don't mind it. Jura then laughs and says, really? And then we get the prior spoilers of Sarada leaving what I assume to be the doctor's office, and she's like, okay, my vision should be okay for now. Then she mentions the spiral pattern on the kunai, whatever. We already went into all the possibilities in my prior video. And just as I said, the most likely option is probably going to be the case. It's just Boruto sending the kunai to direct Sarada to some place where they could talk. We then skip to a convo between Inojin and Kashin Koji. Inojin says, huh? When? Anytime? Koji says, yes, anytime. Inojin then replied, when you say anytime, like when I'm sleeping or when I'm in the bath or even when I'm on the toilet? Koji then says, that is right. He then tells him that they'll be able to connect and communicate through the toad and whatever and use mind transmission as well. Very simple stuff. That is his mission. We then skip to a convo between Amado and Kawaki. And this here says Koji, but I think this is wrong. So Amado is the one who says, you come at a good time. The operation just reached a stopping point. Wait a second, I'm almost done. Kawaki then says, what is this supposed to be? And these frogs. So they're in a room and Amado has multiple white frogs all over the place, which he's now using for some reason. He then tells Kawaki that he can control them at will and describes them as pretty cute. Kawaki then says, get to the point already, you didn't call me here to just show off your favorite toys, right? Amado says, of course not. First, take a look at this. A system for regulating your combat capabilities. This is the status screen. The current setting is attack set to 85% and defense set to 15%, which confirms something that I spoke about, I believe, over a year ago, that Kawaki is pretty much a glass cannon. If someone touches him, it's pretty much over. Now Kawaki then says, oi, 85, you held back. You're still wasting as much as 15%? Didn't I tell you to put 100% into attack, which is very stupid, but anyway. Amado says, don't get cocky, brat. You shut down pathetically at the most crucial moment, and you've got the nerve to say that. It is precisely because I had that 15% that you're still alive and able to stand here now. Now Kawaki, don't get the wrong idea. I'm not blaming you either. That's not what I want to talk about right now. Rather quite the opposite. I can make whatever you want happen, just as you wish. And then based on the images that we're seeing, Amado then switches the attack to 100% and Kawaki has 0% defense and also 0% intelligence as well, but that's besides the point. But yeah, Kawaki notes that the values are changing. Amado then says, they're not just numbers on the screen. I've actually changed them just now. Your combat capability settings. By my own will, instantly, through Gamako on your neck. I can change your settings remotely. And Gamako, of course, is one of the white toads. So pretty much Amado can use the toads that are attached to Kawaki's body to adjust his combat setting, to change his percentages from 85 and 15 to 100, whatever. You guys get the point. Kawaki then says, "What?" which is his favorite thing to say, by the way. Amado, of course, then goes on to explain and says, for example, normally you'd keep your defensive capabilities at 100%. Even if you were to get caught off guard from behind, there's almost no chance that you would die, which is a crazy thing to say, by the way, but I'll save that for a different video. And then when attacking, you switch your attack capabilities to 100%. Instantly, of course. Kawaki then says, "Is that even possible?" Something like that. Amado then replied saying, "If it's me, then it is possible." Though of course, as I mentioned, little Gamako, the toad, would have to stay attached to Kawaki at all times. That is the only thing you need to watch out for. I'll undo the control of your power for you. So Amado is pretty much in full control of every facet of Kawaki's being at this point in time. He's not even a fully functioning person anymore, which is crazy. And he also goes on to compare it to the principle of chakra control and says that for someone like Kawaki who values pragmatism and downplays training, it's perfect. Which is kinda true, I guess. And of course Kawaki agrees, saying that it's not bad, and it makes things easier for him to understand because, as I said, his intelligence points is pretty much non-existent. Now of course Amado never does anything out of the goodness of his heart, so he says, however, in exchange for this technology, if you want my cooperation, there's one more thing I want you to do for me. As if he had any other choice, because Kawaki would have just threatened to kill him and then he would have caved as per usual, but anyways. Now Kawaki of course then goes on to say, just so we're clear, if you're talking about putting a karma seal on your daughter, I refuse. That is something that is supposed to happen after we've wiped out the Divine Tree people. Amado then says, yeah, I know, I didn't intend to revisit that issue. What I want you to do is something else entirely, and it's urgent too. We then skip over to Boruto and Sarada, and he brings her to this big tree that it's so big that both of them can sit on it and you can barely see them. That's how huge the tree is, which is interesting. Boruto then apologizes and says, I figured we wouldn't be able to talk calmly at the village. Sarada then says, must be nice for you being able to fly around so easily. Boruto then replied saying that he's happy that Sarada can see properly for now, and Sarada says, yeah, more or less, but compared to your right eye, it is nothing. Boruto then says, what? Why bring that up now? And Sarada says, because I never properly apologized, I'm sorry. It must have been really hard, right? Boruto then says, yeah, to some extent, but back then, honestly, too many things were happening. It's not like I had the time to be thinking about eyes, you know? Actually, your eyes do look pretty big, though. And Sarada smiles and says, you're such an idiot. So this is, Boruto's failed attempt at, flirting, I think. I think. I could be wrong. But anyways. Now it seems like some time passed because we get that, whoosh panel, and then Sarada says, so Code is targeting me. And Boruto says, most likely. It seems that Code intends to hand you over to the Shinju as a hostage. In other words, your bait to lure me out. During the battle with Mamushi, Code secretly left claw marks all over the village. So there's a risk of information leaks. We don't know where he will appear again. We have to crush them with Kawaki's Sukinai Kona, but even searching for them with the entire police force is a major undertaking. Sarada then says, I see. The reason you came all the way here was so we could talk without Code hearing. The reason you came all the way here was so we could talk without Code hearing. Boruto then says, yeah, that is part of it, but it's also so I can hand over this directly. And he gives her this pendant, I think, or ornament with a symbol. Whatever, you guys get the point. It's the FTG stuff. He then goes on to say, Sarada, the reason I told you about Code's plan wasn't simply to tell you to be careful. The plan is to let him capture you. And then tells her that Code will likely take her to the Tentel's hideout and she doesn't need to worry because the pins or ornaments will allow him to teleport directly to her. Sarada then says, so it's a deception operation. Boruto says, that is right, listen, no matter where they take you, once you arrive the first thing you need to do is throw away the pin. And Sarada says, why? Boruto then goes on to explain that is because it allows him to quickly and accurately read the chakra embedded in the pin. If someone is carrying it, the chakra sensing becomes more difficult. And Sarada says, I see, okay, anything else, Boruto? Boruto then says, of course, I'm hoping it goes well, but it is a dangerous operation. Unexpected situations can happen, but Sarada, never give up hope, no matter what happens from here on out. We then skip back to the Shinju, and Jura says, Hidari, you've been reading that pretty intently lately. Always the same book. Is it really that interesting? Hidari then says, I'm not reading it, I'm just looking. And Jura says, let's see, and he takes the book for himself. He then says, what is this? You are a strange one. You really are. Hidari then says, Jura, what do you think when you look at that? Jura then says, there's not much to say. As long as there aren't any words, you really can't read anything from it. Hidari then says, they're cute, don't you think? And then we get this puzzled look on Jura's face and he says, cute? Now then skip over to Amado meeting up with Inojin in the middle of the village and he says, oh there you are, hey Inojin. He then gives him what appears to be a very small, tiny scroll and then says it's a report containing the data gathered from the battle with Mamushi. It might be useful in future battles. If you meet him, could you give it to him? Inojin then says, by him you mean Boruto? Amado then goes on to say, no, that collaborator. You met him in person, didn't you? Inojin then goes on to say, well, even if you ask me to give it to him, that guy stays in a weird place, wouldn't it be better to give it to Boruto? Now Amado then says, it's fine. If he's a ninja, he should understand right away the importance of this data. He'll understand once he sees it. Now Amado then leaves and Inojin then starts to speak to Koji because he has the toad on him at all times, as I mentioned before, and he says that's unusual, seeing Amado out and about. What do you think is going to happen next? Koji then says, no, we're in completely unfamiliar territory. There's still no update from Prescience. I can't make heads or tails of it. Inojin then says, then what should we do? Koji then says, let's collect it for now. But just to be safe, as we're checking what's inside, let's wait until the next update. Inojin then says, I see. If it's after knowing the outcome, then you'd have the peace of mind no matter what you do. And then Koji performs the summoning jutsu on the item using the toad. He then grabs it and notices something a bit strange. And that's when Kawaki just appeared out of nowhere, which I think means he shrunk to a very small size and hid in the small fur section of the scroll itself. Now Kawaki then raised one of Amado's toads in front of Koji, and the toad says, it's a dead end, Kashin Koji. And Koji simply went to sleep, similar to Delta and Kawaki. Kawaki then says, good grief, so this one has an emergency shutdown code too. Amado then says, I'll transfer him to the lab using the summoning function. You touch the frog too, unless you want to be left behind. Kawaki then says, this crazy scientist. And that is where the chapter ends. Now as you know, I'll save my thoughts for the actual reviews, so that is it for the video. If you guys liked it, drop a like. If you're new, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.